The night sky over Praia da Luz, Portugal, was still and silent. The only sounds were the soft rush of waves lapping against the shore and the distant laughter of vacationers settling into their final drinks at the local bars. It was just another warm evening in a seaside town that, for most, seemed like a paradise. But that night, a nightmare was about to unfold. At 10 p.m. on May 3rd, 2007, Jerry and Kate McCann, parents to 3-year-old Madeleine, were having dinner with friends at the Ocean Club Resort. Their table was a few hundred meters from their apartment. The evening was supposed to be an ordinary one, the kind of night families enjoy when they're on vacation, peaceful, relaxing, and full of promise. But Madeleine McCann was about to vanish. Earlier that evening, Kate McCann had checked on her children. Her twins, Sean and Amelie, were fast asleep in their shared bedroom. But Madeleine, the eldest, had been left in her room, tucked into bed, and seemingly unaware of the fate that awaited her. When Kate went back to check again at 10 p.m., her heart sank. Madeleine was gone. The door to her room was wide open, the window ajar, and the curtains fluttering in the breeze. There was no sign of a struggle, no scream to alert anyone, no trail leading anywhere, just emptiness. Kate's heart pounded. Her breath came in short bursts. She dashed to the room where her twins were sleeping, hoping it was some sort of twisted misunderstanding. But the room was still, the beds untouched, and Madeleine vanished. "Where is she?" Kate screamed, her voice shrill, the shock still settling over her. Madeleine! Her worst nightmare had become reality. Jerry, who had been at the dinner table enjoying a quiet meal, bolted up. The two of them rushed back to their apartment in frantic confusion. The first thing they did was call the police, but they weren't prepared for what came next. As the authorities were notified, frantic tourists and workers began combing the resort. The night was dark, the air thick with anxiety. The resort, a bustling tourist spot, quickly became a crime scene. Police flooded the area, but by the time they arrived, the scent of the sea breeze was the only trace of Madeleine. Hours passed. Then, as dawn broke the next morning, more people were questioning. How could she disappear without a trace? The police had little to go on. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no witnesses. The last confirmed sighting of Madeleine had been at dinner. There were no cameras monitoring the area outside McCann's apartment, which meant they couldn't rely on anything but the statements of those who had been nearby. At first, the idea that this was a simple kidnapping seemed possible. But as hours stretched into days, that theory began to unravel. The child had vanished from an apartment with locked doors, from a small town where nothing like this ever happened. Where was Madeleine? The investigation quickly spiraled into a sea of questions. Was this a random act? Or was there someone nearby who knew exactly how to get in and out without raising suspicion? The McCanns, initially hopeful, began to lose faith in the idea of a quick resolution. The lack of forensic evidence, combined with the resort's high tourist traffic, meant that tracking down the suspect would be like finding a needle in a haystack. By the following day, the police began to suggest that the little girl's disappearance wasn't a random act. Authorities started speculating about the possibility of an abduction. But from where? And who would do this? Among the initial suspects were fellow tourists, a pair of British holidaymakers who had been staying nearby. The husband, acting strangely, was brought in for questioning, but he had an alibi. There was nothing tying him to the crime. Then there was a theory that Madeleine might have wandered off, gotten lost in the complex. But why would a 3-year-old child leave the apartment at night without making a sound? The media frenzy began to spiral out of control. Journalists flooded Praia da Luz, camping out in the hotel lobby, hounding anyone who had been near the McCann's apartment. But as the days wore on, the police were getting nowhere. Then came a breakthrough of sorts. A woman, staying nearby, came forward. She claimed to have seen a man carrying a child in his arms around the time Madeleine was discovered missing. The description of the man was vague, a dark-haired, average-built man, likely in his 30s, walking quickly, but no one could identify him. And the police couldn't determine if the sighting was significant. Was it Madeleine? Was the witness just another person swept up in hysteria? The start of a larger investigation. With few solid leads, The police began to expand their search, not just within Praia da Luz, but throughout the Algarve region. Helicopters circled the area, and divers searched in nearby waters. Dogs were brought in to track her scent. As the search widened, so did the theory that this could have been part of a larger criminal operation, a child trafficking ring. Then, with every new theory came more questions. Why was the apartment unlocked? Was the window deliberately opened, or had someone made an amateur attempt to stage the scene? Why had the police waited so long to start searching beyond the immediate area? The more they looked into it, the more it felt like someone knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who understood how to make a child disappear without leaving a trace. As days turned into weeks, the pressure on the authorities grew, but there was still no sign of Madeleine McCann. There were only theories, whispers, and an increasing sense that time was running out. But then, something unexpected happened. A breakthrough, a call from a woman in Germany. But when they opened the door to the small cafe she had mentioned, what they found changed everything. In the small, dimly lit cafe in a quiet corner of Germany, the police found something that would turn the investigation on its head. The woman had been following the case closely, just like everyone else in Europe. She had read the reports, seen the photos of Madeleine McCann's sweet, innocent face plastered on every headline. But what made her come forward wasn't just a feeling of compassion. It was something that had been nagging at her for days. She claimed to have seen a man, the same man who had been described by the witness in Praia da Luz, at a bus station near her home in Germany, weeks before Madeleine's disappearance. This man, she said, had been acting strangely, lurking near the ticket counters, watching children. The police quickly investigated the tip, hoping that this might be the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Could the person who had been seen with Madeleine have been traveling for weeks before the abduction? Could this be the key to unraveling the case? The investigation was now spreading across borders. The suspect, a shadow in the dark, with a description of the man, roughly 30 years old, average height, dark hair. The German authorities and Portuguese police began to piece together his movements. They searched train stations, bus terminals, and even contacted local hotels where travelers with no clear destination often stayed. But the man remained elusive. He was a ghost. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure mounted. The media buzzed with theories. Was this just a case of mistaken identity? Had the woman from Germany seen a random tourist, or was she onto something much darker? Then one evening, as the investigators pored over thousands of leads, a chilling piece of information surfaced. The German police had caught wind of the suspect, a man who had been involved in a series of child exploitation offenses across Europe in the years prior. The suspect's name was Christian B. He was a German national with a history of suspicious activity in multiple countries. His name had been flagged in the system years before, but he had always managed to slip through the cracks of law enforcement. Christian had been traveling extensively, moving from one European country to the next, often staying in remote, less patrolled areas. The connection to Madeleine. As the investigation unfolded, police uncovered that Christian B. had been in Portugal at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. But his presence was no coincidence. He had been traveling up and down the Algarve coast, visiting the exact areas where tourists frequented, including Praia da Luz. His behavior had been erratic and unreported, slipping past hotel staff, avoiding any direct interaction with locals. But what truly shocked the investigators was the discovery of a strange and cryptic online message that seemed to match the exact time and location Madeleine was taken. The message had been posted anonymously on a popular website for travelers, claiming, "The child is gone. The game is over. No more traces." It was unsettlingly precise. Was this the work of someone who had inside knowledge of the crime? Or was it simply a taunt? A person playing with the investigation? Either way, it added another layer to the already murky mystery surrounding the McCann case. Tracking Christian B. A dangerous game. The pressure to act quickly had reached its peak. Police now had a lead, but they also had a problem. Christian B. had disappeared. The German police had been tracking him for months, but like a shadow, he always managed to slip through their fingers. His trail grew cold each time. They thought they had found him. He was constantly on the move, never staying in one place for long. Then came the twist. Christian had been linked to a number of strange disappearances in several other European countries, cases that seemed unrelated at first, but now painted a horrifying picture of a man with a methodical and disturbing pattern. But there was more. A former girlfriend of Christian's, who had been contacted by investigators, came forward with an unsettling revelation. She claimed that Christian had often spoken cryptically about his obsession with young children and his fixation on the perfect abduction. He would often disappear for weeks at a time, returning with strange stories of people he had encountered, most of them involving children. She described how, on one occasion, he had mentioned the girl in Portugal as though he knew her already. Could he have been planning Madeleine's abduction months in advance? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to align, but the investigators still lacked concrete proof to link him directly to the crime. A ticking clock. Days were turning into weeks, and the pressure was only mounting. The McCann family, who had been publicly vocal about their grief and their desperation for answers, began to lose hope that Madeleine would ever be found. They were left clinging to a fleeting hope that this new lead might be the one that brought their daughter home. But each new revelation felt like a dead end. Each piece of evidence was a fragment of a puzzle that remained too broken to solve. And then, just as the investigation seemed to stall, another shocking twist emerged. A tip-off from an anonymous source led the police to a remote property in the countryside of Spain. The location was eerily close to a series of locations Christian B. had visited in the past. Could this be the breakthrough? Was this the place where Madeleine had been kept all this time? The police immediately dispatched a team to the property. It was a barren, overgrown plot of land with a dilapidated farmhouse at its center. It had been abandoned for years, but rumors circulated that a mysterious person had been seen there not long before. With every step closer to the farmhouse, the air seemed to grow colder. The police were prepared for the worst, but nothing could have prepared them for what they would find inside. The door creaked open. The room was dark, barely lit by the light filtering through the grime-covered windows. There, lying on the floor, was something that no one expected. But as they stepped closer to the pile of discarded belongings, one item caught their eye. A small, stuffed bear, its tag still intact. Madeleine's bear. The discovery changed everything. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a much darker, more twisted web. The discovery of Madeleine's stuffed bear inside that dilapidated farmhouse in Spain left the investigators reeling. A small, innocent piece of a child's life, lying there among the dust and decay, brought the horror of the case crashing back into sharp focus. But the implications of that discovery were anything but comforting. The investigators were faced with a gut-wrenching truth. Someone had been keeping Madeleine captive, and the stuffed bear, unmistakably hers, was the first concrete piece of evidence they had that she had been alive at some point after her disappearance. The farmhouse, hidden deep in the Spanish countryside, seemed like an isolated refuge, far from the watchful eyes of the public. It was exactly the kind of place someone like Christian B., the man who had been linked to multiple child disappearances across Europe, would use to hide his crimes. The web unravels. When the authorities searched the farmhouse, they found more disturbing signs that confirmed their worst fears. A hidden basement. Inside, the walls were covered with maps of Europe, and on several of the maps, the locations of multiple child disappearances were marked. One of those marks was the town of Praia da Luz, the very location where Madeleine had vanished. Christian B.'s obsession with young children, his cryptic messages, and his network of unexplained travel now began to paint a terrifying portrait of a man with a deeply disturbing agenda. The authorities quickly realized that Madeleine McCann was not his first victim. She was just the one who managed to survive long enough to leave a trail. In that cold, dark basement, they also found a series of disturbing photographs, some of which appeared to have been taken at various locations around Europe. But what sent chills down the investigators' spines was one photo in particular, an image of a young girl, her face barely visible but unmistakably Madeleine McCann. The question that had haunted the investigation from the start now had a terrifying answer. Madeleine had been kept alive for months. She wasn't just another victim. She had been held captive, moved from one place to the next. Her life a twisted game played out by someone who had thought he could slip through the cracks of every police force in Europe. The shocking twist. But just when the investigators thought they were finally getting closer to the truth, the case took a shocking turn. Christian B. had disappeared. In the chaos of the investigation, the authorities realized they had been too focused on one lead, too certain that this man was the key to everything. They had failed to notice that he had managed to vanish once again, slipping out of the country like so many times before. He had erased his digital footprint, crossed borders undetected, and likely moved to another safe house somewhere in Europe. The breakthrough that had seemed like a victory was now a double-edged sword. Christian B. was out there, and he knew exactly how to stay off the grid, but the investigation was far from over. As authorities expanded their search for him, new evidence came to light that would change the trajectory of the case entirely. The hidden truth, a double betrayal. It wasn't long before they discovered a second layer to the crime, one far more sinister than they had ever imagined. Christian B. was not working alone. The investigators dug deeper into his past, uncovering a network of people, all connected in ways they hadn't considered. And one name, in particular, kept coming up: a former associate of Christian's, a man named Jurgen M., had been linked to a series of missing children cases across the continent, but his connection to Christian B. had never been fully explored. Jurgen M. had been an enigma, always just outside the reach of law enforcement, operating in the shadows. He was known to have traveled with Christian in the months leading up to Madeleine's disappearance. But what no one had known until now was that Jurgen had been in Portugal at the time Madeleine was taken. But here's the twist. Jurgen wasn't just another criminal. He was someone who had been closer to McCann's than anyone realized. Jurgen M. had worked as a part-time cleaner at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz. For months before Madeleine's disappearance, he had been in the very place where McCann's were staying and where Madeleine had vanished. The connections between Jurgen and Christian now made a terrifying kind of sense. Jurgen had been a trusted insider, someone who had access to the resort where McCann stayed. He knew the area intimately, and he knew the timing was right, with the family leaving their children in the apartment. Trusting that everything would be fine, Jurgen had likely used this opportunity to orchestrate the abduction with Christian's help. It wasn't just a random act of opportunity. It was premeditated, carefully planned. And Madeleine had been the target of a much darker scheme than anyone could have imagined. The chilling revelation. As the investigation gained momentum, a final piece of the puzzle emerged. Authorities in Germany, in a desperate push to track down Christian B. and his associates, uncovered something devastating. A safe deposit box belonging to Christian had been opened weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. Inside, they found a series of video recordings, each one darker than the last. They were recordings of children, some from the various abductions across Europe, others from private, undisclosed locations. And in one of these recordings, Madeleine's face appeared, hidden in the background, her face pale and terrified. But it wasn't just the recordings that made the discovery so chilling. It was the date on the videos, months after the police had stopped looking for her. This was no longer just an abduction case. Madeleine had been moved and hidden for months, and the police had been chasing shadows. The aftermath, though Christian B. and his network were eventually tracked down, and many of the hidden locations where children were kept were discovered, the fate of Madeleine McCann remained a dark and unresolved chapter. As of today, Madeleine remains missing, her name forever etched into the world's consciousness. Her case has sparked an international outcry for justice, but the chilling truth is that the people responsible for her abduction were far more cunning and dangerous than anyone could have ever imagined. The McCann family, though left shattered by the loss of their daughter, have never stopped fighting for the truth. The world may never know exactly what happened that fateful night, but Madeleine's disappearance is a reminder of the dark side of humanity and the lengths some will go to for reasons unknown. This case will haunt investigators, families, and the public for years to come. But the question still lingers. Will we ever know the full truth of what happened to Madeleine McCann? Or is this tragedy just another story that will remain unsolved?